Stand by. Good afternoon, it's 12:27. This is Wednesday, March 7th, 2012. And now, a special New Mexico Centennial Year presentation, live and local on 91.7 FM KUPR Alamogordo and 88.9 FM KHII Cloudcroft.
The Rotary Club of Alamogordo, New Mexico presents Alamogordo, A Century in Time. This is your announcer, Bill Brogan, speaking. Chicago businessman Paul Harris started Rotary in 1905 when he invited 3 friends to a meeting. His goal was enlarging their circle of business and professional acquaintances, as well as sharing fellowship and representatives with representatives of other vocations. The philosophy spread quickly around the nation, then the world. Today, there are more than 1 million Rotarians. Rotary came to Alamogordo in 1923. You'll hear more about what Rotarians do in our community later in the program. For now, though, let's wind the historical clock backwards and move along the rope that is time. Who better to tell our story than residents of Alamogordo and Otero County? Many were born here, others just came. Maybe the military sent them, maybe studying at one of the state's educational institutions, or a job that lured them. No matter the reason, they are now New Mexicans.
There's a saying about New Mexico: in the land of enchantment, the mountains touch the sky. At times, the brilliant but harsh sun makes the craggy rocks black against an azure heaven. In the winter, the high altitude snows make the eyes ache with splendor. Between these mountain ranges are mile after mile of plains and high desert. In the region that will become Alamogordo, a prehistoric sea once flowed. Conquistadors marched across the landscape. Native Americans sought sustenance. Lush grasslands lured cowboys such as Oliver Lee. Men of God and merchants such as George Oliver followed. This is the story of the men and women who brought their families, dreams, and worldly possessions to the land of enchantment. The time, the American Civil War. The place, Mississippi.
George Bradley Oliver, you're home.
Papa.
Eliza, boys.
Samuel back from fighting for good?
Oh, my service is finished, boys. And I nearly was too. Conditions are awful, Eliza. I took sick and the illness nearly took me. But we Olivers have always been known for our strong stock. They sent me to a home, and 4 days later I sent myself home.
Well, won't you have something to eat, George? I've got dinner cooking on the stove.
Oh, I'm mighty hungry. The fighting, the recuperating, and the travels left me with a powerful appetite.
This is why I stink. I catch it, Papa.
Well, that's one worry I didn't have bothering me, knowing my boys would be the men of my family. Oh, your fine cooking's even better than I remember, Eliza. I dreamed about it day and night. There's another dream I got hold of too, Eliza.
Oh, well, that's another thing the Olivers are known for, boys.
What's that, Mama?
Dreaming.
You've got to look to the future, boys. There was a soldier in my company, Company K of the 19th Mississippi Infantry, whose family's been west, and when he gets out, he's joining them in Texas. Others talked about going further, to the New Mexico territory.
George Oliver, I am not raising my family in any town where there's guns and fighting at all hours and gambling.
But before long, Eliza Oliver and her boys caught George's dream. They headed west in a wagon and didn't stop until they arrived in Cooper, Texas. Eventually, they resettled in Roswell, New Mexico. Now with nearly a dozen kids and grown prosperous from retail, George made a pronouncement.
It's 1898, Eliza. The new century is about to be upon us, and there's a brand new town, Alamogordo, just ripe for opportunity. The railroad's there.
George boarded a dray wagon, but this time by himself.
I'm making you a promise, Eliza. No shave, no haircut for me until I've got $500 in the bank. Then I'll send for you and the kids.
George prospered at Alamogordo and his family soon joined him. He ordered watermelons to sell that the railroad brought from El Paso. He bought hides from ranchers and trappers and shipped them out. Over the next 30 years, George Oliver would own 30 pieces of property, including a hardware store, 2 furniture stores, 2 confectionery stores, jewelry stores, and a variety store. He died in 1929, and Eliza followed 10 years later. Their descendants would go on to be prominent members of the community.
The year is 1884. For Texas ranchers, the feeling was, if your nearest neighbor was 40 miles in any direction, that was way too close. Oliver Lee, still a teenager, convinced his half-brother Perry Altman that New Mexico had free land and space farther than the farthest landscape.
Ranching's the way of life I want, my brother. It's in my blood, my heart. It's what I do.
Oliver, you're only 18 years old. You think you know how the world works. There's plenty of land here in Buffalo Gap. Texas is a state. Why move her to a territory? What's there that we don't have here?
Space, Perry.
Space. Our nearest neighbor is more than a day's ride off.
And how long will that last? I hear the New Mexico territory has room to grow, and that's enough for me.
Oliver Lee had heard that in New Mexico there was grass, grazing rights, and water rights to be had. There was just one problem. They didn't discover it, though, until they set foot in southeastern New Mexico.
Oliver, this is the sorriest land I've ever seen.
Which means nobody else will want any of it. There's no competition.
Oliver Lee was right. He earned a reputation of being great with horses and mules, the best with capturing and diverting water, and having a steady hand with a gun. Legend says he once shot the head off a snake while riding at full gallop.
Join me for a drink, Perry. Here's a toast to what we've accomplished, to the Circle Cross Cattle Company.
And to your foresight and enthusiasm, Oliver.
Look here, I had this map drawn showing our buildings, our holdings, 1 million acres. The Circle Cross starts in the Sacramento Mountains, runs to the Apache Reservation, and then south.
Is this right? We even crossed the border into Texas, near El Paso?
We'd have never done that in Taylor County, Texas.
But Oliver was wrong, too. There was competition. John Good was also a transplanted Texan. He sought others' land. In 1887, Lee, Altman, and Good crossed paths. The feud escalated the next year when a close friend of Lee's, George McDonald, was murdered in cold blood. The law failed to catch the killer, and 2 months later, Good's son, Walter Good, was found dead. Lee was among 4 men charged, but the charges were eventually dropped. Then the economy faltered.
We have decisions to make, Perry.
We've grown so big, we're losing control. We also can't get anywhere near the prices for our beef that we once did.
No toast today, my brother. We're going to have to sell. But maybe not everything at once, just in pieces, so we'll still have land to breed horses. There's still a market for the cavalry. The contract calls for soldiers' mounts to be of a certain size, color, and weight. We own that type of stock. Even the military in Mexico will buy from us.
While Oliver Lee's beloved Circle Cross went bankrupt in 1929, he bred military mounts until 1940, the year before he died. He did have other business interests and eventually bought back much of his land. A son, Don Lee, Oliver's 6th child, purchased property adjacent to the Circle Cross and then bought cattle and the Hat Brand from a Guadalupe Mountains rancher. Oliver Lee's descendants still work that ranch and are prominent in the Alamogordo community. From 1918 to 1930, Lee served terms as state senator and state representative. On several occasions, he also found himself a suspect in mysterious deaths, but the law never proved him guilty.
If not for the railroad, Alamogordo may never have arisen from the desert. How that took place is next in this Rotary Club of Alamogordo's presentation of Alamogordo, a Century in Time.
From the diary of John Arthur Eddy.
Perhaps it may often be wondered how the town of Alamogordo got its name. It devolved on me to name the stations on the railroad, and in doing so, I sought to apply those of local characteristics or landmarks. Would have been natural, therefore, to use the word Alamo, but it was objectionable because of it being so common and so many Alamos. In my cowboy days, one of my favorite camping places was between Las Vegas and Seven Rivers. It was on a little stream running into the east side of the Pecos called Alamogordo. I have learned its meaning to be a big or rotund cottonwood, and upon seeing such a tree, or the relic of such a tree, at the mouth of the Alamo Canyon, the name came back impressively to me, and that is how Alamogordo got its name.
Throughout history, events occur because fortune and fate came together. Without one or the other, the event would most likely never take place. The founding of Alamogordo is one example. The first event happened in the late 1880s, a rail line under construction out of El Paso to White Oaks. Then the county seat of Lincoln County ran out of money. Then...
But Mr. Gold, the opportunity, it is too good to pass up.
It's a small line. What do I care? The company laid 10 miles of track and went broke. What possible good does a tiny line that runs through the middle of nowhere in the territory of New Mexico do me? How, pray tell, is that going to benefit my Union Pacific and Missouri Pacific Railroad?
Sir, the territory has been trying to get statehood for 30 years. Sooner or later, that will happen. Commerce will proliferate. And besides, mines flourish in that entire region north of Mexico and El Paso. Gold and turquoise among them.
Really? That would give us a stake in that part of the West. Okay, make an offer to buy. Make that short stretch part of my Texas Pacific line.
Railroad magnate and financier Jay Gould, one of the world's richest men, bought the fledgling line. Not long after, however, in 1892, Gould died in New York at the age of 62. 5 years later, two brothers who had been cattle and sheep ranchers in Colorado since 1879, Charles Bishop Eddy and John Arthur Eddy, along with their lawyer William Ashton Hawkins, bought the line from the city of El Paso.
We haven't got much time left to get the business underway, Charles.
Our agreement stipulates that we begin construction by December 1st.
That's, well, odd.
How so, William?
This railroad project has languished for 5 years since that robber baron Jay Gould died on December 2nd, 1892. 1 day before the 5th anniversary of his death, our agreement requires us to have the crews out building. The weather can be mighty harsh this time of year. It's cold and windy. Look at today. Let's hope there's enough labor.
That was not the only provision for which the purchase agreement called. The 10 miles already in place were deteriorating. The three men had to put up a $10,000 deposit as a guarantee that they would build rapidly. True to their word, within 18 months the company had put down 100 miles of track. By February 5th, 1898.
Here it is, just 2 months gone by, John, and we've hit the Texas state line into the territory of New Mexico.
16 months after that.
It's a beautiful day, Charles, June 15th, 1898. Let's hope our work here brings fruition far into the future.
Doesn't seem like much grows in this desert.
William, there couldn't be a finer day to say the El Paso and Northeastern Railroad has reached the town of Alamogordo.
Alamogordo wasn't much back then. The Eddies were still acquiring legal title to 940 acres from the federal government. They didn't even own the land when they sold the first lot on June 7th, 8 days before the railroad arrived. Only 2 months earlier, in April, had they bought water rights from Oliver Lee. The only real residents were the railroad workers and they lived in tents. That picture, though, wasn't to last long. The Eddies had some experience in town building. A decade earlier, they had founded a community that bore their namesake, Eddy, which would eventually be renamed Carlsbad. They had made mistakes there. The streets were narrow, and the landscaping, well, there wasn't much in the way of landscaping. Alamogordo would be far more aesthetic.
But John, this is desert. Water is precious.
Don't much care that it is, Charles. I have this vision. I just cannot get it out of my head. Recreating the natural beauty of our native state of New York. We will have here in Alamogordo an oasis that will be a model community.
And what will that cost the Alamogordo Improvement Company? We're still just selling lots.
We'll build ditches and reroute water from the La Luz and Alamo Canyons. You've been to those areas. What's there? Trees, all kinds of trees, because there is water. The highlight of this town will be the park. We'll build it right next to the railroad, with trees for shading and ponds and swans. Alamogordo will be a place where a man can settle down and get married, raise his kids, enjoy nature's beauty, and live the leisurely pace of the West. There's also no lack of water from the Sacramento Mountains. The snows there every winter are heavy. The forest is thick with pine trees and wide stands of oak and aspens. We could even extend our rail line there and build a resort community 8,000 feet in altitude. Along the way, we could log trees to make railroad ties.
Seems like you're getting ahead of yourself here, John. I do have one suggestion for Alamogordo, though.
And that would be?
Make your streets wide, but don't make them straight. Already people are racing their horses. Doesn't matter whether the streets are muddy or dusty. Not a very leisure-sounding pastime to me. Winding streets would be a lot safer.
And I, too, have a suggestion.
I'm listening, Charles.
If people are racing nags and gallivanting about and probably gambling on their pastime, sounds like the population needs a diversion we can control. Remember how the demon liquor got out of hand in Eddy?
As your attorney, I propose to make this city dry, except build one central location next to your park, John, and control the liquor. Do that, and you avoid the riffraff that grows like cockroaches in these small towns. There won't be anything to gamble on, and the unscrupulous ladies with their wicked temptations will stay away because there won't be profit in loose morals.
A quarter of a century later, when Alamogordo celebrated its 25th anniversary, a festival John Eddy was unable to attend. He addressed the brothers' original intentions regarding alcohol in a letter.
The temperance feature of the town, acquiescing in the sale of liquor on one specified block, and its sale conducted by the company, was my invention. To have been constitutional provision for its purchase for medicinal purposes was essential. From experience in other towns, I had learned that this converted drugstores into saloons, the druggists reaped the profits and the town its deficits. I think it demonstrated such to be the only rational temperance regulation.
Alamogordo grew quickly.
1898. Alamogordo isn't even a year old when a hotel goes up with the electric lighting.
1899. The tents are gone. 150 buildings have risen from the desert floor. 29 of them are commercial businesses. There is an ice plant, 2 sawmills that produce 250,000 board feet a day of lumber, and a waterworks.
While the Eddies controlled their company community, they did not recreate the nightmare of other eastern towns where labor was forced, and in return unions led violent strikes. They sold lots at a reasonable price. A turnkey house sold for as little as $2,000. Restrictions did not stifle business.
1900. The census puts the population at 1,509.
Where are you going on from that? There ain't no time to stop. There's too much to build. We're going on through the night.
(1905) 2,322 men, women, and children now call Alamogordo home.
Well, John, I must admit, The trees have changed the whole look of the town, and who would have thought higher education would have come so quickly?
The Baptist College is a nice, respectable addition, makes good people want to come and stay, teaches only the Bible, which builds character and no sectarianism.
The Alamogordo Improvement Company planted thousands of trees and built the Alameda Park adjacent to the main thoroughfare, Pennsylvania Avenue, on one side and Railroad on the other. The Eddies then forged their rail line up through the Sacramento Mountains. The Cloud Climbing Railroad helped log and build the picturesque village of Cloudcroft.
1900, Charles Eddy buys his brother's business interests for $100,000.
1905, Charles sells his holdings to the El Paso and Southwestern Railway, a subsidiary of Phelps Dodge Mining Company. They paid several $1 million for the railway, land, water rights, and coal deposits.
Both brothers would die in New York City in 1931. Williams Hawkins, though, lived his life out in La Luz outside of Alamogordo. The Tennessee native died in 1939. Early in life, he had served with the New Mexico Volunteers against Geronimo and the Apaches. When he suffered injuries in 1939 after falling from a horse, Hawkins went to the Veterans Hospital in Albuquerque. He died there and was buried in the National Cemetery in Santa Fe.
More of Alamogordo, a century in time. The Rotary Club of Alamogordo's contribution to the New Mexico Centennial is just ahead. Stay tuned.
I'm Bob Flotte. I've been a member of the Rotary Club of Alamogordo since January of 1978. I'm also owner and general manager of radio stations 91.7 FM KUPR Alamogordo and 88.9 FM KHII Clowncroft, which are bringing you this live presentation today. Alamogordo was only 25 years old when the Rotary Club of Alamogordo was chartered in 1923. Growth in the town had slowed since 1905, and the community, after World War I, only had 2,700 residents. The year the Roswell Rotary Club sponsored the Alamogordo organization, 19 men, community leaders, and businessmen all joined as charter members. The club set about improving the town that the Eddy brothers and William Ashton Hawkins had created. One of their first projects was organizing a town band. Evidently, they were pretty good musicians as well. They also began improving Alameda Park, and that included paving the tennis courts. Every Christmas, Rotarians would provide the holiday tree in the park. Just down the way to the south was a railroad depot. On Mother's Day, Rotarians handed out flowers to women departing or climbing onto the train or wading through a layover. The club began planning for the first street signs in Alamogordo, and they helped pave for the first time the dirt streets. Members purchased a landing strip outside of town for those newfangled aeroplanes. Organized Junior League Baseball came to Alamogordo early on through Rotary sponsorship. At White Sands, which wasn't a national monument until 1933, Rotary organized an annual play day. Some have called this the greatest sandbox in the world. And up in the Sacramento Mountains, in the Lincoln National Forest, which was less than 25 years old at the time our club was chartered, Rotarians picked up their tools and hauled wood to the Boy Scout camp near Clowncroft to build the first bunkhouses. Rotary is a philosophy of life with the motto, service above self. The Rotary Club of Alamogordo meets on Wednesday at 12 noon at the Fraternal Order of Eagles, 471 24th Street in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Consider joining us for a meeting and for fellowship.
You are listening to Alamogordo, a century in time. The Rotary Club of Alamogordo's contribution to the New Mexico Centennial.
Under a sky of azure, where balmy breezes blow, kissed by the golden sunshine, is Nuevo Mexico.
While that is the opening line of just one song that Elizabeth Garrett wrote, perhaps it is the most famous, "O Fair New Mexico." New Mexico as a state was only 3 years old, and Elizabeth Garrett was 30, when the daughter of famed lawman Pat Garrett killer of Billy the Kid, wrote the tune and the music in 1915. 5 years later, she set down roots in Roswell, where she taught piano for 27 years. She died in 1947 when she fell on a city street and perished from her injuries.
Long before then, though, I called Alamogordo my home. While I was unable to enjoy its beauty because I had lost my sight not long after I was born, I helped to create a lasting legacy for young children who were afflicted as I was. You probably cannot fathom living in a world where you cannot see a thing. Close your eyes for a minute. Listen to those noisy, horseless carriages. I've stood alongside a gentle, majestic horse when I spent time in Texas, and I just cannot imagine having to face down one of those noisy, cantankerous, metallic monstrosities walking along the street. But the world is one in which those of us without sight must get along if we hope to enjoy the life that God has gifted us with. Your community, Alamogordo, was only 5 years old when one of the town's 3 founders, William Ashton Hawkins, went to the territorial legislature in 1903. He'd only been elected the year before. He didn't represent just Otero County, he also represented Doña Ana, Grant, and Luna counties.
Gentlemen, please, some quiet, please, and some respect for the freshman legislator who has the floor. Sir, Mr. William Ashton Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I introduce today a bill that will create the New Mexico Institute for the Blind in the young community of Alamogordo, the territory of New Mexico.
Here. All in favor?
Aye.
The measure passes. Mr. Hawkins, congratulations.
That may have been Mr. Hawkins' finest act of public service to his town. Construction began, and the building was ready for students in 1906. I taught there, and I served on the Board of Regents. When the doors opened for the first time, there was 1 superintendent, 2 teachers, and 21 students. That first building was a 3-story brick edifice, an awe-inspiring picture of solidity for students in an unsure world. The property, I'm told, was one of the greenest spots on the Alamogordo landscape, 20 acres on the north edge of town. Our wells provided the water to keep the site a beautiful one. But can you imagine? At first, they called us the asylum for the blind. People just didn't understand that we weren't something to be feared.
Funds at first were slim, and often the school was forced to close early in the school year because there just wasn't enough money.
But we believed in the hope that we could provide to students who deserved an education, just as other students did.
The community believed as well. Unlike the Baptist College, which closed in 1911, what is now the New Mexico School for the Blind and Visually Impaired still educates New Mexico students who are vision impaired.
Oh, fair New Mexico, we love you so. Our hearts with pride overflow, no matter where we go.
Elizabeth Garrett is just one of many who made Alamogordo their home during its history, perhaps even more so than the sculpted mountains to the east, west, and north, and the flat desert that stretches south to Mexico and to the seemingly unlimited horizon. People have molded what the town was and has become. Lacey Sims came to Alamogordo in 1905 at age 19, joining his family after completing the college year in Commerce, Texas. His father was a beloved doctor practicing at 3 Rivers and on the Mescalero Apache Reservation.
Life was not easy for anyone back around the turn of the century. Life was especially not easy for me. It would have been even harder had I let what many considered a handicap hold me back.
Lacey was 5 years old when his father, preparing for his medical career, took a temporary job in a cotton gin in eastern Texas.
Daddy, I brought your lunch. Whoa, we're going so soon. What did you do, Daddy?
Well, Lacey, get away from there, stay away!
Mr. Sims had turned away for just a moment. That's all the time the curious boy needed. The machinery caught his arms and took them both below the elbow. Many years later, Lacey Sims would write, yes, write, of that moment.
The 1891 newspaper account of my accident was to the effect that a child of J.M. and Anna L. Sims had lost both hands in an accident. There was no philosophical comment or bewailing. The accident was caused by my childhood disobedience and inborn curiosity. I wanted to know what my father did every day and how he did it. It is easy to say that providentially I didn't lose my life, and correct to say that it's useless to try to judge as to what inherent values, undeveloped then, would have accrued to the world otherwise. Suffice to say that immediate parental wisdom took over to a degree that permitted early age human adaptability to occur. Fortunately, the way of adjustment is to accept challenge and forget limitations.
Lacey's father had to make a difficult decision. Would he coddle his young son as if he were handicapped, or make the difficult decision to toughen the boy up?
My father helped me some when he saw that I was having great difficulty in spite of great effort. After about a year, he said,
"Son, I'm not going to help you at all. You can do it. It's up to you now."
Naturally, I wanted to have by trying rather than have not by not trying. My grandfather Lacey said to my mother, "Don't cry. There's no telling what he might have done with 2 good hands and a red-headed temper."
When Sims joined his family in 1905, he began teaching school. He served on the last board of trustees of the New Mexico Baptist College and eventually was elected to 2 terms as county school commissioner, superintendent.
Not long after arriving, I was the toast of the town, it seemed. In spite of the loss of my hands many years before, I could play a tune on a piano, and I composed music as well.
Lacey's talents were a welcome addition to Alamogordo's social and cultural scenes, and seemingly never ending. In his late 70s, Lacey took up painting and kept at it until he died June 21st, 1982, 4 days before he would have turned 96.
The only real handicap I had seemed to be those darn artificial hands they had me fitted with. You know who bought them for me? Henry Ford. Cost $100. I finally threw them away in 1913. Well, actually, I buried them in my backyard in Chicago.
Lacey Sims did not spend all his years in Alamogordo, perhaps due to his inner strength and his unfailing faith in himself, as well as his fellow man. God called Lacey to the ministry. After studying at Oberlin College in Ohio, he entered McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago in 1920. He went on to pastor there as well as in San Antonio, San Francisco, and El Paso. Most of his congregation spoke Spanish. Lacey was bilingual, a skill he learned, not surprisingly, living in Alamogordo.
Alamogordo, a Century in Time, has been a presentation of the Rotary Club of Alamogordo. Michael Shinabery wrote the script. Bob Flotte and Michael Shinabery produced and directed this presentation, broadcast live from the Alamogordo Fraternal Order of Eagles. The production facilities have been the courtesy of Robert Schenk and Joan Griggs at New Mexico State University in Alamogordo. This is Bill Brogan speaking. Thanks for listening.
Okay, all the actors and everybody involved stand up and take a bow.